Welcome to Random Assignment, everybody. The broadcast is live, and that sign says Indoctrination Center ahead.
What is that, though? What is an indoctrination center? That just looks like a building. Oh, but wait, there's a kid walking to it.
It's with a backpack.
Do we really want those things to open back up?
It's some kind of government ministry, isn't it? Some sort of institution run by the government to tell people what to think. Isn't that the concept of an indoctrination center, Corey? Like some kind of, like Orwell in 1984. It's like a government ministry that tells people this is what you're supposed to think. Isn't that?
Yeah, the government has a monopoly on information, and you have to go through it for 13 years unless you can afford to pay for something else. If you can't, too bad, you get to listen to the government indoctrination for 13 years of your life. And then you have these proposals for universal pre-K that are coming, and then universal community colleges will have government indoctrination for even longer than 13 years before we know it.
Yeah, universal 3 and 4 year olds, and yes, it's as I like to quote often, early in Chris Christie's governorship in New Jersey, he called that babysitting, and he got all kinds of, how dare you refer to this as babysitting 3 and 4 year olds going to school, and I just can't help but think about that every time I hear those proposals. Like, it's critical, that these kids get an early start, but then, whenever they do studies on the Head Start program, for example, and whether by third grade, if you can tell which third graders went to the Head Start program or which third graders didn't go to the Head Start program, there's no academic difference.
And it's a random assignment study, the Head Start evaluation, no effects for a ton of money by the end of third grade. And then even worse, if you look at the Tennessee pre-K experiment, the latest random assignment study of a scaled up pre-K program in Tennessee found negative effects on academic and behavioral outcomes by the end of third grade. Maybe we should fix the 13-year system rather than trying to tack on an additional year to an already broken system, expecting things to get any better.
An additional 4 years, if you count 2 years of preschool and 2 years of junior college, or
that'll do it. Community
college, we call it these days. Well, let's talk about the title, about indoctrination. Sometimes we try to avoid these things because, sometimes the racial subjects are touchy, especially for a couple of white guys to talk about, Corey. It's almost, sometimes I think people feel like if you accidentally say the wrong words a little bit, you'll be, canceled for life or something. People are scared to talk about this issue because it's fraught with so much peril, if you accidentally say something. But it has become such a widely reported story, not just this week, but in the past few months, really. It seems to have been building up to a fever pitch. So we have this from Politico saying, red states ready to defy Biden's aggressive indoctrination on education. And they cite here Wisconsin, Florida, Alabama, signaling that they would put up a fight against Biden's expansive social welfare proposal. Now, indoctrination takes many forms. Some say that there is a creeping feminism being introduced in schools where, boys are kind of taught that masculinity is toxic, and there are teachers kind of on board with all that. Of course, the 1619 Project and critical race theory may be more prominent than that, but there are also issues of transgenderism where little kids are taught that if they need to sit and think about what gender they want to be because maybe they want to be a different one than they've been told by their parents. And those kinds of things have become a part of some, but not all, public school systems in the past few weeks. And so, we're seeing it explode.
So what's the pushback from the red states? Is there some type of federal funding proposal that's incentivizing states to have certain curriculums, or what's the angle on this here? I thought I heard something about Biden having some type of executive order, but I'm not sure if there's any funding that has been tied.
Well, Politico describes this as the Biden plan structured as partnerships between the federal government and states, meaning they will require both political and financial buy-in from local officials to get up and running. Republicans in states like Wisconsin, Florida, and Alabama, Politico writes, are already signaling they would put up a fight against Biden's expansive social welfare proposal, casting it as a blatant example of federal government overreach that would be costly to implement and maintain. It says, without states' cooperation, it says there's little the Biden administration could do to guarantee these things, but it's saying part of the $1.8 billion $1.8 trillion families plan is going to tie money to certain educational priorities.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the federal infrastructure funding for roads. Every state quote unquote voluntarily accepts the funding in the 21 drinking age, but without that federal carrot, maybe they wouldn't have all had agreed on the 21 age for drinking in every single state.
Yeah, or some have said it's a new Common Core, which a lot of people remember 7 or 8 years ago became the biggest story in the education space for a number of years, where the federal government, it was structured as not a federal dictate, just as you described. It was structured as, oh, look, we'll have these 2 consortia and they'll come up with their own tests. These two groups will do that. But nevertheless, there was no doubt that federal money was spent, billions of dollars was spent to get Common Core up and running and kind of push this through as the one way we'll educate all students in the U.S. So go ahead.
So I feel like this year in particular, with all the shutdowns and the remote learning, people have started to see what's going on in the classroom. And I think that's why we're seeing a huge uptick in the amount of bills that are circulating. One, for school choice, we talk about that every freaking week, but there's another stream of bills that are being introduced that Christopher Rufo has been tracking at his website, calling to ban critical race theory or other forms of quote unquote divisive topics. And so we have some, I just wanted to bring up his tracker real quick. I just want to point out, it looks a lot similar to another tracker that I've seen before. Hold up. This is the Educational Freedom Institute tracker with the school choice bills. Here's Christopher Rufo's tracker. Hey, if it ain't broke, don't break it. I think it's a great idea to track these this way. But a lot of people are checking this out, and there's just a lot of movement in different states. You have Iowa, Idaho, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, even South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, West Virginia. Looks like mostly red states, and some of them have already died in committee or other. Some of them are still in play. I think in Arizona, for example, I think that might just be a transparency bill to see what's going on in the classroom. But I like that someone's actually tracking these things when it comes to curriculum and quote unquote divisive concepts in the classroom. And it looks like some of them already passed, right? Like in Idaho, the governor signs a critical race theory bill.
Yes. In Idaho, and then other particular school districts have been talking about this. And we want to point out, it's not always just from federal pressure. To some extent, there are state-based advocates who want to push things like critical race theory. And so, yes, they have a Tennessee story there. There's the Oklahoma City.
Oh, Texas.
Oh, there's the Texas. Texas says here, this is so far just a bill. Yes, it's a bill given House approval, but I believe Oklahoma City went ahead and passed a resolution. So this is the opposite case, by the way. This is New York State, where the Board of Regents basically said, no, we are going to call on school districts to acknowledge racism in America. So it's kind of pushing back the other direction, just, the red state, blue state divide that Politico referred to.
Yeah, I really like, honestly, if I could pick between the school choice bills and our bills, I think Neil McCluskey has it right that we shouldn't force people either way. And he wrote about this in The Hill. He's the co-editor on of the book that I co-edited as well, School Choice Myths, Setting the Record Straight on Education Freedom. He's at the Cato Institute. And he writes in The Hill that government indoctrination, whether it's critical or patriotic, is wrong. And his argument is, these are pretty contentious topics and that a lot of people have different values and they disagree on how things ought to be taught and what should be taught in schools, and that we shouldn't force a one-size-fits-all system that doesn't work for everybody, particularly it's particularly forced on the least advantaged who cannot escape that one-size-fits-all system. Instead, we should just allow everybody to choose the institution that they send their children too. And the best way to do that is to give the money directly to the families. So I like Neil McCluskey's
I mean, my response to that, though, is to gently say that if you're going to teach history, to some extent, you need to decide what to teach. And I think the debate actually has been hijacked a little bit. It's leaning the wrong direction. The debate is whether that we're teaching kids the wrong history about the U.S. because the right history is this other thing. So both sides say that. Both sides say we think the right history is that America is fundamentally racist, and that needs to be, and we won't only teach that, but it's a fundamental truth. And the other side says, no, the fundamental truth is America is about expanding individual freedom, and it's been a work in progress. It's not so much who's right and who's wrong, because let's face it, everyone knows you can be 100% truthful and simply choose to focus on things that are optimistic or choose to focus on things that are pessimistic. We all know probably couples where some people tend to say good things about the spouse or the significant other, and the other couples where they often don't pick. They pick a negative thing to say about the spouse or significant other. It doesn't mean anyone's lying. It just means how you happen to select the narratives that you choose to select. So it's not about right or wrong. It's about, these kinds of shadings of what's the most important factor. Now, personally, I think it's kind of, I don't know how you persuade someone to work hard and try in a country that you've just explained is out to get them, or the cops are out to kill them. Or, if you basically explain that we're in a fundamentally dysfunctional culture that hates you, but go ahead, please still try to work hard and make something of yourself. I'm not sure personally how successful that kind of persuasion is. But I mean, the other way to look at it is to say, but you don't want to bury the problems and ignore the problems, because then you don't make progress on problems. You have to acknowledge things wrong with the country before you can move forward. So anyway, it's just simply to say I'm 100% on page with you. And actually, I would just say that when you choose what to teach in history, I would say this to Neil: you have to figure out what to focus on, and so. Those decisions are going to come from somebody somewhere, whether it's a state curriculum advisor or a teacher or somewhere in between at a district. Someone has to decide. Go ahead.
And although I agree with Neil that, the utopia is everybody gets their children's education dollars, let them go to whatever type of school works best for them. Government doesn't determine what is considered truth, because the government oftentimes gets that wrong, especially with highly contentious topics that can be taught in different ways and more or less biased ways in one way or the other. But absent that, I think, a lot of like our friends, Max Eden at American Enterprise Institute and others have made the argument, well, we got to make a decision for, absent getting to the utopia, what should we do with the kids in the public schools now? And I think the argument is that, well, maybe we shouldn't teach divisive concepts that tell kids pretty much to that their country is a horrible place, and maybe we shouldn't touch on those topics and it shouldn't be included in the classroom.
Well, is anyone proposing that we not teach that slavery existed, or that we not talk about Jim Crow, or that we not talk about King being assassinated? And I mean, I would think of course you want to talk about all those things. It's just a question of whether you frame those things as look at the progress we've made, or you frame those things as look at the proof America's evil. You can choose which framing. So anyway, does Neil mean, or does Max mean, don't talk about slavery? In history class, I don't think so.
No, absolutely. And if anybody wants to check out Max Eden's latest piece on this from a week ago, it's in Newsweek. His take is ban critical race theory now. And I think he's pointing towards the ideas that, just based on the color of your skin, that you're inherently one way or the other. And he would classify that as explicit racism itself. I think it's super complicated. I'm not taking a side on it either way, because to be frank, I don't know enough about the particular theories to have a extremely informed opinion on it. But that's another reason why I think people should be able to choose, because it's so complicated.
Well, I see it as kind of an umbrella term, critical race theory, that really started with the 1619 Project published in the New York Times, that the New York Times themselves retracted and corrected is maybe the better term, but it took them 7 months to do so. And a bunch of historians came forward denouncing the authenticity of the 1619 Project, as it was called. And then only then did the Times say, okay, well, we're going to remove this part, where it talked about essentially the fundamental reason that the U.S. was formed was to continue slavery, because, as the argument goes, slave owners were worried that England was going to ban slavery, and since they were so invested in keeping slaves, they therefore had to declare independence from England. This is what the argument was, despite the fact that there are all kinds of abolitionists who were part of the revolution, and there's lots of research. Even in the Constitutional Convention, the governor of New York made a stirring denouncement of slavery at the Constitutional Convention, the governor of New York. So anyway, historians came forward and said the 1619 Project claim that the revolution was an attempt to hold on to slavery was false. And the New York Times relented on that. But now I guess many of the same people have now backed up to a more vague set of historical interpretations called critical race theory.
Did you see the latest interview with Randy Weingarten, AFT president, and Marsha McCollum on Fox News? Marsha tried to press Randy on her views about critical race theory in schools, and pointed out that a lot of the 1619 Project in particular has been debunked by several historians. And when questioning Randy about that, I believe Randy just kind of turned around and tried to say, well, Fox pushes disinformation too, and that's the true. And she really just pivoted away from the question when Marsha was just trying to say, well, would you support this kind of stuff in the classroom? Yeah. And Randy wouldn't say one way or the other, and just kind of said, well, 1619 is a date in history that happened, and that was pretty much the. Not the exact quote, but that's pretty much how it went. It was pretty much, that's a date. It happened. On that.
Yeah. Well, we should say, so this has spilled over into not all these states, but you now have people coming up to school board meetings giving impassioned talks about this subject matter and about what's being taught to their children. Sometimes people of color doing this, objecting to the critical race theory in their schools. And so in Loudoun County, Virginia, for example, there was a woman that came up and gave a very passionate presentation. I think this was yesterday at a school board meeting, and we should have that clip.
In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Now I have a dream that we will implement love, not hate, or supporting another Jim Crow's agenda. CRT is not an honest dialogue. It is a tactic that was used by Hitler and the Ku Klux Klan on slavery very many years ago to dumb down my ancestors, so we could not think for ourselves. CRT is racist. It is abusive. It discriminates against one's color. Let me educate you. An honest dialogue does not oppress. An honest dialogue does not implement hatred or injustice. It's to communicate without deceiving people. Today, we don't need your agreement. We want action and a backbone for what we asked for today, to ban CRT. We don't want your political advertisement to divide our children or belittle them. Think twice before you indoctrinate such racist theories. You cannot tell me what is or is not racist. Look at me. I had to come down here today to tell you to your face that we are coming together and we are strong. This will not be the last. Greet and meet respectfully.
She's referring to CRT, meaning critical race theory. How do you like that? Look at me.
Dang, this is a super contentious topic. I'm glad parents are going and voicing their concerns to the school board, but is the school board actually going to listen? Bob, what do you think?
In that case, I think so. I think because it was a woman of color. I think if a white woman would have said the same thing, maybe not. But in this case, I think I would be hopefully optimistic that they would listen to that parent. But we'll see. But there was not the first time in 2 weeks that a Virginia parent has stepped forward to the lectern, was it?
Yeah, let's check out Azra Nomani. She's actually associated with an organization that our friend is a part of, Erica Sanzi. It's called Parents for Defending Education. And here's her impassioned statement at one of the latest school board meetings. It has over 500,000 views on Twitter alone. Here, check it out. Azra Namani.
My name's Asra Namani. I came before you in June 2020. I spoke to you during quarantine. I pled with you at that time because I said to you that we had activists from Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, where my son is a senior, and that they had just baited the idea of an Occupy TJ movement. I sent a note to every single one of you, and I got not a single response. There was no concern about our students at that time. And then the summer proceeded, and the principal at our high school told us that our mostly minority students and parents had to check their privileges. And then, as the summer continued, Dr. Brabrand, you decided that our students and our families were spending thousands and thousands of dollars on test prep. And then you, Melanie Marin, told us that we were toxic. And then Karen Keys-Gamarra promoted the idea that we were racist. And then by the fall, every single one of you voted to remove the merit-based race-blind admissions test to TJ. And we pled with you as Asians, as an immigrant. I came at the age of 4. I knew no English. And you didn't listen to us. And now I sit here listening to this empty proclamations and declarations that you're making about your great value of Asian Americans. You tell us about you going, Melanie Marin, to a Japanese restaurant. Well, do you know that just a few weeks ago in social emotional learning at TJ, our students were told that if they do salsa dancing, it amounts to cultural appropriation, and that they needed to check their racism, and that is our mostly minority, mostly Asian students. And so your empty proclamations are just that. And then today, we get this vacuous survey from you, Dr. Brabrand, and you dare to tell us that you're going to consider removing the one policy that parents have to defend their students from indoctrination and activism, the policy that makes certain that anything taught in our school that is controversial must be presented fairly. You have to just think for yourself, if you have to remove a policy like that, how can you possibly be doing anything good? And then this survey, it's just a loaded survey. And who is it by? Indeed, New York Leadership Academy. And what has that survey done? They've asked us the questions for the
Thank
contract
you for your time.
that you have now signed.
Thank you for your time.
That will allow
Thank
them
you
to
for
spend
your
millions
time.
of
Your
dollars.
time is up, ma'am.
You all
Your time
need
is
to
up,
have
ma'am. Your
conscience.
time has expired.
Yes, you
Your
always
time has
want to shut us
expired.
down.
Next speaker.
Continue to shut
Next
us down.
speaker.
Because that's what you love. to do.
Please go to your seat.
Wow.
I don't like that at the end. You know,
I mean,
treating the. I know she went
You
over
have to have rules
time.
about time.
I know she went over time, but it was just kind of like treating her as if she was one of the students. But
You
it was
don't need that tone. Exactly.
Yeah,
You could just say, yeah, I'm so sorry, man. But you could keep doing that. You're absolutely right about the tone.
Yeah,
One
so
other
I'm
thing
just going to
before we-
raise my voice and scold you and tell you to go to your seat like a student. Like, come on.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
what I
a bad-
don't. I don't
that's
like that. It's because the school board knows they don't really have to listen. The parents can complain. The school board could even say, "Oh yeah, we'll do it," and then not do anything about it.
Of course. And I know we spent like half the show on this. Before we move on, I just wanted to show you the link I just sent you on Facebook, Corey, if you brought up since that came up earlier. There is an actual grant. It's for history. And so I wanted to offer that clarity to our viewers, which is Biden administration cites 1619 project as inspiration in a history grant proposal. So this would be money. I think it's not completely finished in its formulation yet, but this from Education Week, the story saying that the Biden administration wants a grant program for history and civics education to prioritize instruction that accounts for bias, discriminatory policies in America, and the value of diverse student perspectives. Again, I think we can all imagine a version of this that would be innocuous, and yet I think we can also, maybe most of us, imagine a version of this that feels like a particular point of view indoctrination. And so anyway, so you had asked about that. I didn't see a dollar amount in that story exactly. I'm not sure it exists yet, but that is perhaps the basis for some of this red.
I think that's what I was thinking about earlier. Like there was something tied to some type of curriculum. Looks like history.
Yes.
So, but you're saying you could look at this and saying in a way that it wasn't him saying you must use this particular type of curriculum. It was him just citing an example, I guess. It could be one way to look at it.
You know the way these things work so much, Corey. There's gonna be some subjective decision making on the part of the feds in D.C. on whether they like your proposal that you sent in on how you're going to teach history and civics, and can we please have the grant? And they model all their language in the way that you know, modeled your RFP or whatever it's called when you put out a description of calling for grant proposals. So. You know, the idea is that it will not necessarily be explicit. It will be an implicit form of say it like this.
So let's maybe highlight some of the updates to where we are with the states when it comes to school choice. Move to a more positive topic. How about that?
Okay. What state do you want to go for first?
Well, we do have a video from DeSantis. Should we?
Ron DeSantis.
Let's play that after. Maybe since we just played 2 long videos. So the update now is that we have 11 state legislatures that have passed some type of new program or expansion of an existing program, and
30 states that have introduced bills.
Yeah, at least 30. I think there's more than 30, but I just there's at least 30 states with bills in play, and 11 states have either passed new programs or expanded, and that happens to be West Virginia, Kentucky, Arkansas, South Dakota, Florida, Indiana, Georgia, Missouri, and Kansas. Their legislatures have passed expansions, and Maryland actually expanded their funding for their Boost Scholarship program, an existing program. So that's 11 states. The 2 biggest are West Virginia and Kentucky. Would be the 2 biggest education savings account programs. I think Florida is very monumental too, in that it's what they're calling the state's largest expansion, which already has a ton of school choice in the state of Florida. Their largest expansion of private school choice in the state's history. And so DeSantis had a press conference yesterday announcing that he was signing the bill, and he did this at a Catholic school. So here's a clip.
We really believe that empowering parents to be able to have the widest variety of educational choices for their kids is a recipe for success. Obviously, wealthy parents have the world as their oyster. They can make whatever decisions they want, and they can do it. But when you talk about low-income families, working-class families, they may not have the luxury of being able to get their kid in the school of their choice without our assistance through our scholarship programs.
Wealthy people. I mean, it's the point. It's the point that can't be made enough, right, Corey?
Absolutely. And DeVos actually congratulated DeSantis as well on Twitter. I think this was today, and she used a pretty catchy phrase at the end of her tweet. Bravo, DeSantis, more than 60,000 more Florida students will now have the opportunity to learn and wait. Florida continues to lead the way in funding students, not systems. I'll take it.
Where'd
Go, Betsy.
That?
I don't know. I don't know. It's a good way to talk about it.
Well, and did you see the story from DeSantis also from Florida today, where DeSantis told children to expect a normal school year next year?
I haven't seen that.
Yeah. And if you go to the FL School Choice on Twitter, man, probably pop right up there for you. I hope you don't prove me wrong. Let's see.
Well, Florida's been killing it all along with reopening schools, quicker than most states.
Yeah, there we go. Do you see FL School Choice?
Twitter's doing the whole. It's doing the whole loading thing. 7 million. It's happened. But here, yeah, it's coming. I'm working on it.
The second one there. There you go. All right. Oh, your poor
Yeah, it's
internet.
like-
It's just,
dude.
yeah. The hamster's
Too
getting
many,
tired.
too many things open.
It's
All right,
running on.
DeSantis
There we
said-
go.
Oh my
Oh.
goodness. These kids do not need to be wearing masks. Okay, I'm sorry, they don't. We need to be able to let them be kids and let them act normally, and that's what should be the case in the fall and throughout the school year. So that's a
No
quote from
masks?
DeSantis.
Just be normal. Kids do not need to be wearing masks in the fall. Have a normal school year, says the governor of Florida. So I'm just
Boom.
tacking that on to the school choice news from expanding the. And it was partly a combination of there was a McKay scholarship for special needs and a Gardner scholarship in Florida, both basically voucher programs that were combined into this new one. But now the combined one is going to be larger than both of the ones that came before. So. Yeah, have a normal school year.
Yeah, the biggest news was that I mean DeSantis signing that huge expansion just the other day, and I think and we were talking about this a little earlier, but I think the main expansion point, there's a couple of points in the bill. One is that it kind of consolidates the programs. Two, it increases the funding from 95% of the state portion of funding to 97.5%, which is not a lot more funding for the scholarship amount. But then the bigger expansion is that it should increase the income-based eligibility each year, not just this year.
Yes.
Tens of thousands
Meaning
of more students.
More middle-class parents will qualify for.
And over time, after enough years and getting to that escalator, it should be essentially a universal program in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And the other news is I wrote some testimony in favor of this bill, actually, that was heard last week in Texas, and it just passed a couple days ago out of their Senate Education Committee. The vote was 7-3. It's a tax credit scholarship program. As a reminder, Texas does not currently have any private school choice programs at all. They have charter schools, but no programs that explicitly allow the money to follow the child to a private provider of education. And here was the vote. The co-author of the bill is actually a Democrat, Lucio Jr., who is part of the Senate Education Committee, and it passed out by a vote of 7-3. The other three Democrats on the committee voted against, whereas all Republicans who were present and voting voted for. So it passed out 7-3. But in Texas, we're not sure what the prospects look like in the House. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Now, here's something fun that happened for those watching the Gutfeld show on the Fox News channel. There was a guest, Corey DeAngelis. I believe it might even be last night even on that program. Corey, what was it like going there? Tell people what it's like to be a guest on that show, and maybe you have a clip.
Well, it was cool going to a studio in person instead of going to the DC studio or doing something just from home. So that was nice. And, there was like 5 of us there in studio. And what was also great about it, it was a full hour block. And I didn't even know that when they first invited me to do it. I was like, okay, they'll have me come on and do a little thing about teachers unions or something and school choice movement in the States.
Like a segment. But normally you assume it's a segment.
I usually do a 2 to 3 minute or maybe 5 minute segment. But this was a whole hour. So I stayed in New York City Monday night. It aired Monday night at 11 p.m. and we recorded that day. So that was great. Yeah, I just got back from New York City yesterday. It was actually pretty fun. The regulations for dining and stuff are actually not as bad in New York City as they are in DC right now.
Is that right?
You can sit at the bar and eat in New York City, but you can't do that in DC still.
I did not know that. It's only been for about a week or two. You can do it in New Jersey, where I am, and so I'm surprised you can't DC. I don't know. You think is it marijuana now legal in DC?
Recreationally, and I don't think you can sell it or something.
I would think in a pro-marijuana city like DC, they would have allowed the bars sooner. But
the lockdowns are a different animal. But here's a little clip. from one of the segments that was related. I will say there were a lot of segments that weren't explicitly related to education. So if you want to go see me fumble on some responses, maybe go to those parts of the show. But here's one of the segments that had to do with Zoom learning going bad, as reported by the New York Post, and a Spanish teacher
California
misbehaving on the Zoom. And it wasn't even clear whether the teacher did it on purpose or not. I mean, last time New York Post wrote about like a misbehaving teacher, the teacher defended themselves saying, like, I didn't know the class was still going. I thought I turned it off. It doesn't seem like in this case that like I didn't get any sense that it was an accident with this one. But here's a clip from the show if you want to check it out.
Corey, you're in education, or so you claim. This Zoom call seems to be the kind of thing that happens when you are allowed no competition in education.
Well, it's totally crazy. I mean, in the last time that something like this happened that the New York Post reported on, we didn't know whether the teacher was, actually meant to do what they were doing. In the last case, they were like, well, I didn't know I was still being recorded. I thought the class was over. This one, I didn't really get a sense of what was going on.
Yes.
But what's interesting here is that for all the bad that's happened over the past year with remote learning, children losing ground academically, mentally, physically, socially, so much harm happening to children over the past year, one of the silver linings is that people have started to figure out what's going on in the classroom.
Right.
So it could be this kind of thing that we're seeing in the Zoom classroom as reported by the New York Post, or it could just be inadequate education going on or political indoctrination happening. So the way that I've put it before is that COVID-19 didn't break the public school system. In a lot of ways, it was already broken, and the past year has simply shined a spotlight on the main problem with K-12 education in America, which happens to be a massive, long-existing power imbalance between the public school monopoly and individual families. And now families are thankfully fighting back, and they're seeking options like school choice. In over 30 states, there are bills that have been introduced.
What happens to these
fund
bills?
students.
So these bills are for funding students, not schools. That passes. Is this going to happen in our lifetime?
Well, if we look at the legislation happening all across the country right now, at least 11 states have already passed these bills through their legislatures, including Florida, West Virginia, Kentucky, Indiana, and other states as well. And if you look at the 3 nationwide polls on this topic by Morning Consult, Real Clear Opinion Research Polling, and Harvard University actually did one as well, finding that over the past couple of years, support for funding students as opposed to systems has skyrocketed. And it's probably because the public school teachers unions have overplayed their hand, and in a lot of ways, they've done more to advance the concept of school choice than anyone could have ever imagined in the past year.
You know, Jimmy, what worries me is if we do have more school choice, we'll have fewer stories about nipple incidents on Zoom, and then our show suffers.
Okay. I want to jump in and defend this teacher for a second.
Okay.
Because in her defense, under Common Core, you have to show your work. I mean, how did we arrive at this conclusion? No, to your point, public schools are a disaster. My only concern with the, migration over to private schools is we're like 5 years away of talking about like student loan forgiveness for kindergartners, and I'm not ready for that yet.
Yeah.
Like, she took on a lot of debt to go here and play on the swings, and I'm not happy. But it's embarrassing, and there should be more accountability from teachers. Did you have a point? I'm sorry, you raised your hand.
I was
got so
just
excited.
going to say, we already spend the money in the K-12 public school system. In the United States, we spend over $15,000 per child per year. We don't need kids going into debt if we could just take the money that's already existing in the system. Heck, give me 2/3 of that and let me find a private school to pay for tuition and fees. And let's be real, over the past year, this whole reopening debate hasn't been about what the most advantaged families should have, because they accessed pandemic pause and private schools right away.
The people at the top could not be more dumb.
All right, let's cut it
Yeah.
there.
All right. Well, let me just say, I mentioned a second ago how Ron DeSantis in Florida said, hey, kids, no masks next year. Next school year will be a normal school year. A new term came up called mask choice. This was reported on by an Indiana local television station. And although it'll say New Haven, you might think, oh, that means Connecticut. It turns out there's a New Haven, Indiana also. It's not Connecticut. But I kind of thought this may catch fire, that maybe mask choice is the next big thing in traditional public schools. So here was the debate in Indiana.
New tonight, East Allen County Schools passing a resolution for their opening plan for the next school year. The majority of board members voting to allow students to have to choose whether or not to wear a mask, following guidance from the Allen County Department of Health. Fox 55's Nico Panisi is live in New Haven, where he spoke with community members about the decision. Nico, what did some of them have to say?
Chris, there were folks arguing both sides of the coin. Some parents said that mask wearing is causing unnecessary stress and it's damaging their children's mental health, while others say mask wearing is crucial to everyone's safety. Regardless, the EACS school board made it very clear tonight that it's their desire to give people mask choice.
The resolution that we passed, we just wanted people to know what our desire is, what we would love for the fall to look like, and that would be mask choice.
East Allen County School Board President Todd Buckmaster says there's wording in the document that connects the district with state and local officials' guidance.
What's best for health and what's best for people, whether it's mandates or whether it's recommendations, that we will still be able to weigh those options and adjust that if we need to.
Desiree Koger Gustafson is a strong supporter of mask choice.
The mental hardship that our kids go through and the lack of any meaningful harm to them from COVID at this point. We're a year and 3 months or so into it.
A mother of two, Ariel Black, spoke on the podium about her concern for her children's mental health.
And I've heard people say with my son's cancer journey, children are very resilient. But I personally don't know a single adult that's not carrying around childhood trauma.
The one board member to vote against the resolution was Paulette Nellums.
Did we even discuss this with the communities that are disproportionately affected?
Nellums is referring to people of color. She worries their voices aren't being heard in this issue.
The EACS school board says that they hope that the document is flexible and is able to adjust as new information and research becomes available. Many say that it's difficult to tell where the climate will be 3 months from now. In New Haven, I'm Nico Panisi.
I don't know. What do you think about this, Corey? Mask choice.
I'm typically on the side of choice. I mean, a lot of, some states have lifted mask mandates already. So, I mean, if you look at the DeSantis quote, that's what he wants to go towards, right? To allow families to have the choice and to kind of get back to normal, especially with where we're at with vaccinations now and where we're at with school reopenings in places like Florida. I think it really depends on the location and the situation of the individual family. But again, if we're talking about choice, they should be able to make that decision better than the local governments even.
All right. What do you got? What's next?
So we can't miss this story. I actually wrote a pretty long piece about it yesterday and edited a little bit today. It should be up tomorrow or the next day, but it's so ridiculous. I mean, just when you thought the teachers unions couldn't go any lower in California, we have this. Check it out. At first, you might think, this ain't that big of a deal. San Francisco high school seniors can go back to in-person classes this week. You might look at this.
Good news.
Oh, yeah, this is great. They get to go back to classes. And then my first thought was, wait, isn't the school year pretty much over? Aren't the teachers unions typically saying, last time this happened, typically didn't they say like, well, it's the end of the year. There's no point in going back now. We might as well not go back. Why are they going back? Well, it just so happens that this happens to be the day right before the deadline for school districts in California to get their share of a $2 billion taxpayer bailout from the state government. So
no, you don't understand, Corey. There's just a coincidence that the COVID fears actually happened just on that exact day. It became safe enough.
It's safe.
It was too dangerous the day before the deadline for the state funding. Yeah, it turns out just the very deadline of the state funding coincidentally happened to line up with when it became safe. Don't you see that?
I mean, this is just another example that has nothing to do with the science or the safety of the schools, because if it did, they wouldn't reopen on the 14th. I mean, it's just so convenient for them to go back. And we all can look at this and know that they're doing it to get that cash. I mean, in San Francisco, the district officials estimated that their share of the $2 billion is about $12 million. And they lose it if they reopen any day after the 14th of May, which happens to be this Friday.
I know. And sometimes I joke around about this stuff, but to expect parents to believe, oh, we really want to get back in class. We so desperately want to be back in class. We're just going to wait till the day before our magic funding bonus wouldn't be there.
It's worse than that.
Suddenly it becomes safe. It's worse than that.
And it's even worse than this. Look at the headline a little closer. Then I started thinking, well, why is it seniors in high school? Like, what's so special about seniors in high school? I look back to the March 1st announcement about this from the governor, Gavin Newsom, and the legislature. It turns out that the deal was you had to have all elementary schools open and at least one grade in middle school and high school. So what do? Well, we're going to do that.
Gosh.
We're going to open one grade, and it's going to be seniors, the people that are just mostly probably just sitting around waiting.
The people least likely to show up for the very end of a school year.
They're about to graduate. They're about to graduate.
Yes.
What were you doing your last week of senior year before your commencement ceremony? Not much.
Exactly.
Not as much as what you were doing in 11th grade or 10th grade or 9th grade. So they get the seniors going back. And it's even worse than that. So it's just one grade, bare minimum for what they needed to get the cash. It also happens to be that there will be in-person supervision. There will be people in the buildings to watch the kids. Teachers aren't going to be there for instruction.
Oh, kidding me.
And this is we've seen this in California
for one grade without actually having teachers show up.
And no teachers showing up. They'll have someone watching, but if it's safe enough for the child care workers to watch the kids, why isn't it safe enough for the learning to happen in the schools? Well, it's probably because it has nothing to do with the science and what's safe. It's about you have one class of employees where they get paid either way, so they're going to do what they're going to respond to the incentives that are put in front of them, and they get the same paycheck either way. So. Of course, they're going to have someone else going. And we saw this in Los Angeles, too, in San Francisco for the elementary school kids as well, where they had the Zoom in the room, where the kids were going back to the classrooms, but still doing Zoom because the teachers were still home, and they had the child care providers. And it's the same kind of thing. And we've seen this throughout the entire time. One other thing from California that the Reopen California Schools group just found out through, I don't know, whatever source they got this from, but here's the email from this teacher in West Contra Costa Unified School District in California. The teacher is going to a son's wedding in Mexico, and because of that, they can't provide the in-person instruction to the kids, and they're going to have completely asynchronous days, which means they're not doing pretty much anything on those days. They'll just assign homework or something while they're traveling.
It's too dangerous to teach in person, but off we go to Mexico, right? In other words, yes, it's we're going to opt out of when it comes to your kids, we're going to opt out of the in-person because we want to be careful about COVID. Mexico, here I come.
Yeah. So my quick response, I can't even load the quote tweet, was safe enough to travel to vacation in person, but not safe enough to teach in person. I mean, this is just more of the same kind of just ridiculous things that we're seeing in the system where the kids aren't the priority. And it's because the money doesn't follow the kids. If we actually gave families the funding, we'd probably see different actions on the part of the people in the system. Again, I don't blame the people in the system. I blame the system itself And I mean, you look at things going on in San Francisco, the system that the public school district is just, and the teachers union in San Francisco are just responding to that weird top-down incentive that was provided by the government to just check a box to say, okay, well, we did the bare minimum that was required, give us the funding. But that's a different type of incentive and profit motive than if you give the money to the families, to where the schools would actually have to listen to the needs of the students. And that's a better incentive structure than to just have them check a box, which may or may not do what the families actually want.
It epitomizes top-down versus bottom-up incentives is what it does. You're right. That you can have a bureaucratic framework where, don't worry, we're regulating this, and we have a bunch of boxes they have to check, and that's why the schools will be run okay. Well, what do? They figure out how to manipulate the system, check the boxes in the way that produces the least impact on them as having to do any work, and therefore they get the money. And, and the parents, I mean, San Francisco, a city where the city actually sued its own school district this year. So, I mean, how dysfunctional is that? The same city government essentially suing itself. From one big city to another, I wanted to mention, there's a video that the vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union was interviewed on CBS, and she said a pretty amazing thing. It's actually one of the videos I sent you. Before we go to the tweets, I want you to see the clip of this woman and what she says about going door to door.
What are you hearing from teachers and potentially even students who are uncomfortable returning to in-person learning?
Well, what I'm hearing is that their worries, their concerns and anxieties are being addressed by our mayor and our school district. And so what we have proposed is a door knocking program this summer in which we send out our members, teachers, paraprofessionals, clinicians, to engage the families that they deal with in their school community, to ask questions, to understand hesitancy, to understand what we need to implement to make it better. Here in Chicago, our public school system has received almost $2 billion for COVID relief. What we need to do is make sure that those funds fund the recovery, fund engagement, ensure that the families who have suffered the most under this pandemic, Black families, brown families, have the ability to recover and are heard in this process.
Okay, so to review, she says, we are proposing a door-to-door campaign this summer, and that Chicago Public Schools has gotten $2 billion that we need to make sure, she says, should be used to fund engagement. So Choice Media tweets out the clip you just saw, explains that Stacey Gates, this woman you just heard, is proposing a door-to-door knocking campaign to talk about COVID, which is what the clip says. Well, she responds in tweet quotes saying this was a lie, that we're lying about her. So
what was her argument?
So someone didn't watch the interview. Shocking, we must center the supermajority of Black and brown families that did not return to buildings. So the IL School Choice, Illinois School Choice Twitter feed then responded by saying, well, what was the lie? She later, in a later tweet, she actually says, yeah, you can hit more replies. She says there was a lie. She says that there was, let's see if you have it there. Yeah. And so Illinois School Choice says, what's incorrect about says teachers should be paid to go door to door, because it's what she said in the clip. It was a direct quote. Are you not asking teachers to be paid? In other words, which was the lie? If it was a lie, the proposal for the door to door, or that they be paid? And then all she says, no, CTU Local has a summer organizing institute for the last 10 years, and that it would be on our dime, she says. So then Illinois School Choice says, but that's consistent with the original tweet. The original tweet says teachers would be paid to go door to door. Now she's changing the subject to on whose dime it would be, even though, of course, she's not saying $2 billion must be spent to fund engagement.
Give us that relief funding. Quote.
Clearly, she was implying in the original video. And so instead, she just says, like, take the L, and then she starts tweeting these.
Gotcha.
These basically GIFs, animated GIFs like the one you just saw, like that. And then Illinois School Choice keeps saying, but what's the lie? You said door to door, and so now you're saying on our dime, which means they would be paid. That means the original tweet was correct. Anyway, so this was back and forth. They got at least 10,000 views, the original video on Twitter, because a bunch of people started jumping in and started saying, yeah, the union did exactly. That's not what she said at all. Well, it actually was what she said. And in the following tweets,
crazy, dude.
Yeah, you can see a bunch of people jumping in saying, no, the original tweet was correct. And now they're just trying to change the subject by bringing up this question of who's going to pay the teachers, which was not a part of the original tweet. At any rate, and
especially when they start hinting at $2 billion in relief funding.
Of course, it was clearly implied. Yeah. Everyone understood what she meant. She, in juxtaposed sentences, she says teachers should go door to door, and then in the next sentence she says $2 billion to fund engagement should be spent. The $2 billion should be spent to fund engagement. So everyone understood what that meant. And then eventually, before too long, and about 9,000 views, they backed off and shut up about claiming the quote, that the tweet was a lie.
Did you see this article that Neil McCluskey called out from CNBC talking about how average private school tuition is like $26,000 per year? Everyone on our podcast listening should know that the average private school tuition is far less than what we spend in the public schools per year per student. It's actually around $11,200. Neil McCluskey is correct. And there's another source that puts it at around $12,000, but it's far less than $26,000 and some change is what they cited in CNBC. And you go and try to figure out what they linked to. They linked to some like college article. It had nothing to do. You can't find the $26,000 number in there at all. I went digging a little further because this same author made the same mistake like a month ago at least. And Colleen from Commonwealth Foundation also called it out. They were citing NIAS schools, which are an elite subset of all private schools. It's only about 7% of all private schools are NIAS schools, which if you look at their report, the average is about $26,000 per student per year for tuition. Yeah. So after calling this out again and blowing it up on social media, they finally made a little bit of a quote unquote clarification, correction, whatever you want to call it. And here it is. Here's their original sentence. Private schools come at a price. Overall, the average cost of tuition at independent schools across all grades is $26,866 a year, according to NAIS. That's misleading because that's only like 7% of all private schools. It's only about 1,600 private schools are NIAS schools, and there's about over 30,000 private schools in the U.S. And then after the pushback, they added in this little clarification.
I see that. A broader definition includes parochial. Yes.
Yeah, where the heck did it go?
A broader definition. I mean, that just means that's the definition.
Why don't they point out that their definition of NAIS
was
schools
narrow,
which is not the definition of private schools. You don't have to be an NAIS school to be a private school. So like they're acting like that. But like, why didn't they point out that their definition only includes 5 or 7% of all private schools?
Yeah, they're spinning, of course, to make it seem like they were not as wrong as they were. Children do this when they get caught, telling something that's untrue. I've seen this for years too, where a journalist will pick a couple of elite boarding schools and say, but Johnny, if Johnny, were to go to this, such and such Polo Academy, look at the price of this elite boarding school. Well, clearly, no school voucher is going to pay that much, and so they'll just do it through anecdotes, or they'll do it through this kind of selective subset.
And they also made sure to add in, a broader definition of private schools, including parochial schools, which are generally subsidized. No link at all to the claim that parochial schools are, for the most part, subsidized.
What does that even mean? Generally, what's the definition of that?
I think they're
saying subsidized. Huh?
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
think they're saying like the majority, I guess, of parochial schools are subsidized. But like, one, you don't have a citation for that. I don't know if that's true. You're not giving us any.
It's not relevant.
And then two, it's not relevant. Yeah, like
what matters is what a
This.
parent has to pay in tuition.
Yes.
That's what's relevant.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just wanted to point that more misinformation in the media. This same journalist was called out about this, and it blew up on social media for doing the same thing, same exact number in another article. In the other article, it was even worse. They were saying like, yeah, private schools are more likely to reopen, but it's because they have so much money. And so they were trying to use that number as like, see, well, if the public schools had more money, maybe they'd open too. But the reality is private schools are more likely to be open, and their tuitions, at least, are a lot lower than what we spend in public schools per student per year, particularly when you're looking at Catholic schools. Yes. So that was my irritation of the week when it comes to the media. Did you watch? You watched the Martha McCollum interview with Randy Weingarten?
Right. Uh-huh.
I wanted to just. Her whole thing was like spinning and dodging, and then like she tried to blame Trump for schools not being open. Here's a little bit of a clip from this interaction. I think it was yesterday on Fox News, or 2 days ago.
But the bottom line is this:
most of them
if we had actually listened to Dr. Redfield and the CDC last May, and that the former president, hadn't kept on changing his mind and changing these things, we would have gotten more schools back in session.
Because what you told me was that there wasn't money, that some of these schools had problems like mold. I mean, all these things started getting into the mix that were not part of the equation at all when parents were just wanting to get their kids to go back. So obviously you didn't have the pull with the prior administration, but in this administration, there have been $20 million has gone to Democrats, from teachers unions and teachers organizations. So I guess that money seems to be working.
If he could keep changing the things and changing changing his mind and changing these things, what are you talking about? I mean, the unions kept the schools closed.
Right. In other words, if it was really the president, then that's odd that the private schools, they're under the same president too, aren't they? The charter schools are under the same president too. Wow, that's funny.
Yeah, so I thought that was a fun interview to watch. If anyone wants to go check it out. But other stories, I think we've covered them all for last week.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching yet another spellbinding edition of Random Assignment. Thank you. Please tweet and like and subscribe and all that stuff, and follow our website at choicemedia.tv. We'll see you next week.